Hey guys, Victor here. Today I'm going to be ranking Soulsborne games based on their enemy and boss designs, mechanics, difficulty, how much fun I had playing them, and the overall game. I'll also be explaining why I put them in their certain ranks on this tier list, and just to clarify, this is my own opinion, and after the video, if you would like to let me know what order you would have them in, feel free to leave a comment down in the comment section below. Enjoy the video. Next up is Bloodborne. Bloodborne is one of my favorite Soulsborne games mainly because of the boss fights and its combat system. Bloodborne's combat is fast with different types of weapons with the options of sidearms and the ability to switch between melee weapons for heavy and light attacks, which allows you to play around with different weapons and weapon combos, which keeps the game's combat fresh. Most of Bloodborne's enemy designs are unique and come in many different shapes and sizes. Another thing I like about Bloodborne is that it sticks with the game's eerie atmosphere throughout the entire journey. Another thing that I love about Bloodborne is its difficulty. Bloodborne is one of the most difficult Soulsborne games I've played, and it forces you to play aggressive, which I liked about it. Bloodborne's eerie and spooky environment made great with its scenery, and with all that, I think Bloodborne would fit nicely into S tier. Next up is Dark Souls. Dark Souls is a great game. Dark Souls art and graphics are good, and its combat is great. But the Dark Souls levels and environments are challenging, but they weren't as challenging as the other Soulsborne games. Dark Souls enemies have some cool designs and its boss fights are creative and thrilling. Examples of this are the Gaping Dragon and Artorias. Soulsborne games are known for their difficulty and not giving players directions on where to go. Though I think Dark Souls did a good job on not guiding the player on where to go by throwing you into its open world for you to explore. I feel like this is a good example of what a Soulsborne game should be like, and it's great all around. Though I do have to say it does lack in difficulty, I think it would have to fit into 18. Moving on to Dark Souls 2. Dark Souls 2 has some good mechanics and unique items. To me, Dark Souls 2 was one of the harder Soulsborne games I've played because it was a bit different with its mechanics, and the journey itself compared to other Soulsborne games was a bit more challenging. Dark Souls 2 had some enjoyable boss fights, and each boss fight has a unique design that are relative to their environment. Some of the boss designs that I like personally are the Dark Lurker and the Pursuer. Dark Souls 2 had some great scenery and each level looked great, but the thing I loved most about Dark Souls 2 is the way that it introduces new areas with amazing scenery. Dark Souls 2 is a good game. Sure, the journey was a lot difficult, but it did have its problems, like its awkward enemy placement, the game's animation timing was slow, and the game's hitboxes were a little bit off. With this many problems, I think I would have to put Dark Souls 2 into B tier. Now let's talk about Dark Souls 3. Personally, I had a lot of fun playing Dark Souls 3. Even though Dark Souls 3 was one of the easier Soulsborne games, it was very enjoyable. The game did a good job in its areas and levels because it was fun to explore in and get lost in. Dark Souls 3 did good with its combat and weapons, but another thing Dark Souls 3 did good in was the boss fights. The boss fights had me on the edge of my seat and made me focus and be patient on the fight. Another thing I liked about Dark Souls 3 were the enemies and boss designs. Some examples are the Nameless King, Abyss Watcher, and Soul of Cinder. Even though Dark Souls 3 had some stuttering problems and was not as difficult as the other games, I think I still had a great experience and the game deserves to be in A tier. Alright, now it's Elden Ring. Elden Ring is a masterpiece. The reason I have to say Elden Ring is a masterpiece is because it keeps the players constantly hooked, whether it's with its amazing scenery, the wide open world for you to explore and loot, the wide variety of weapons and weapon arts, armor, and boss fights. Elden Ring has everything a Soulsborne game needs and does it perfectly. The only thing I don't like about Elden Ring is that it gives the players a tutorial and guides them. But other than that, I think Elden Ring is probably one of the best games I've ever played, so with that, it would only be right to have it in S tier. Next up is Demon Souls. Demon Souls is an alright game. I would say Demon Souls is decent because it was the first Soulsborne game that came out. Its mechanics compared to the other Soulsborne games are a little bit basic, and the fights are also pretty basic. But that doesn't necessarily mean the game's bad. I did enjoy the boss fights, like the fight with Tower Knight, Flame Lurker, and Storm King. The thing that makes me want to put Demon Souls a little bit lower on the list is that the enemy attacks were a lot slower compared to the other Soulsborne games, which made fights and the attacks a lot more predictable, which took the fun away from it. So for that, I think Demon Souls would have to fit right into B tier. Finally, at the bottom of the list, Sekiro. Sekiro is one of my favorite Soulsborne games or video games of all time because of its combat system. Sekiro's combat system is so unique for most games because it mainly focuses on parrying attacks, breaking enemies' posture, redirecting thrust attacks or lightning attacks, deflecting attacks such as sword slashes or bullets. In Sekiro, instead of going through areas collecting armor and different unique weapons, you stick with the same katana throughout the game and learn new moves and attacks through multiple skill trees. The game throws enemies that might be difficult for you to handle, but in return, they give you tools to overcome them. These tools are known as shinobi prosthetics, which help with enemies that are geared or even with boss fights that might be too difficult for you to handle. Sekiro is difficult because it requires the players to have patience and quick reaction time. Another thing that I love about Sekiro are the bosses like Ishin the Sword Saint and the Divine Dragon. Sekiro's bosses are all different and difficult, but another thing that I like about Sekiro is that the game gives players an option to play stealthy and take down enemies with a gruesome execution. While I did enjoy the swordsmanship in Sekiro, I also enjoyed fighting giant enemies as well as mythical beasts. Lastly, Sekiro's scenery and graphics are amazing. Not as good as Elden Ring, but it's up there. So with this, I would most definitely put Sekiro into S tier. Well, I'm glad you guys made it to the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it, and special thanks to my friend Swazi for letting me use his music in this video. You can check him out on the following social media platforms on the screen right now. And I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Thank you for checking out the video. See ya.